The crackling of the fire illuminates the faces of the assembled warriors. The skald, a man with a braided beard and a voice carried by the north wind, raises his mead horn and begins to speak. His tone is grave, charged with mystery, while shadows dance over the runes carved into the wood around him. Listen well, sons of steel and thunder. This is not a tale for the faint of heart. It is a saga of blood and glory, where gods walk among men and fate is forged on the blade of the axe. For in this land, where winter never sleeps and wolves howl at the moon, there is a tournament that only the bravest dare face. The Jarl's tourney, where steel sings and the weak fall. But this year, something has changed. The skald pauses, letting the silence weigh on his listeners. He takes a sip of mead, his eyes glowing like embers, and then continues. Gunnar Cold Flame. You have heard his name. Yes? The man who never fell. His axe split skulls. His name echoed through the winds. No warrior dared challenge him without trembling. But then a stranger appeared. A man like no other. Tall as a Jotun, eyes as black as the moonless night. He entered the tournament as if he were already the victor. He fought without hesitation, without fear, as if death itself respected him. And Gunnar, the unbeatable, the invincible, for the first time, felt a chill run down his spine. For in his heart, a doubt was born. The skald leans forward, his voice now a conspiratorial whisper. Was Gunnar facing just a man, or a god in disguise, testing the worth of mortals? The fire crackles, the wind howls outside, and the silence that follows is heavy as the steel of an axe ready to fall. The night was cold as the first Jarls gathered to discuss the future of their clans. Scandinavia was a wild land, where the strength of one man decided the fate of hundreds. Villages grew, kingdoms expanded, and with it, the challenges increased. No leader could afford to show weakness, for weakness drew blood. Thus a question arose that burned in the hearts of the warriors. Who was the strongest among them? Which clan possessed the supreme warrior, the one who would stand out among the rest as the true champion of the North? It was then that a man stood up. Jarl Herrick Iron Teeth, a feared and respected warlord, with silver hair and scars that told tales of endless battles. He looked at the other leaders and spoke in a voice like thunder. The gods do not favor the weak. Our clans need worthy champions, and there is only one way to find them. We will fight, not in the shadows of the forests, not in the alleys of the villages, but before everyone's eyes. The heavens and the gods will testify who is the strongest. Silence fell over the hall. All that could be heard was the crackling of the fire in the great bonfire. The Jarls looked at each other. They knew that this idea was dangerous, but also inevitable. After all, power was the only currency that truly mattered in these frozen lands. The first tournaments were held in open clearings, where the champions fought in front of their Jarls. But as the years passed and the fame of the competition grew, arenas began to be built. The largest of them was built on a cliff, where the wind howled like the wolves of Fenrir and the sea crashed against the rocks below, as a warning that only the most worthy would survive. The rules were simple, for complexity was a luxury that the Vikings despised. Each Jarl could send a single champion. That champion carried not only his own honor, but the honor of the entire clan. He must fight with all his strength, without mercy. For a warrior who spared an enemy in combat was a man who invited defeat into his own home. There were only two ways to win: to strike down the adversary and make him surrender before everyone, or to kill him where he stood. And so each victory was written in blood and remembered for generations. The victors did not receive gold, for gold rusts in the hands of cowards. They received something more valuable, immortal glory. Their names were chanted by the skalds at every feast, and Odin, the All-Father, surely watched them from the halls of Valhalla. Over the years, many names were carved into the wood of the halls. Ulfgar, the Unbreakable, who fought even after losing an eye and a hand, crushing his adversary with his own brute strength. Sigvard, the Scarlet Fury, who won 10 consecutive fights without resting, his body covered in cuts but his will as sharp as his axe. Einar the Spectre, a man who fought without making a sound, his eyes as empty as death itself. But not all who entered the arena left it. Many champions fell, their bodies carried back to their clans in funeral boats, their flames rising to the sky, carrying their souls beyond the veil of this world. And in time, something began to happen. Stories told of certain warriors who fought with strength beyond mortal comprehension. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures at the edge of the arena, watching the fights with eyes of fire. Others said that the gods themselves had begun to send their own champions disguised as men, testing the strength of mortals. Now, centuries later, the Jarl's tournament had reached its peak. It was more than an event. It was a trial by the gods, a field where warriors proved their worth in the face of fate itself. And in this tournament, there was a name that echoed like thunder, Gunnar Coldflame, a warrior who had never lost. His axe had already drunk the blood of dozens of champions. His name was sacred, feared, respected. The skalds sang his glory, and the Jarls raised their mead horns to toast his victories. But that year, a new challenger had emerged. He belonged to no clan. No one knew his name. No one knew his story. He simply arrived, with eyes as black as the starless night, and entered the arena as if he already knew the outcome of that battle. The elders began to murmur, the Jarls, to look at each other, and Gunnar, for the first time in his life, felt a cold unlike the north wind. After all, was he facing a man, or a god in disguise, ready to claim the glory of the tournament for himself? From his first cry, Gunnar was marked by destiny. He was born beneath the bitter winds of the north, where the gods whisper through the storms and the cold forges men as hard as iron. His village, Husavik, lay on the edge of a steep fjord, surrounded by dense forests and rough seas that carried warriors and raiders to and fro. It was a place where life was as merciless as it was beautiful, where only the strong survived, and the weak were forgotten. His father, Sigurd Ulfsson, was one of the clan's most feared warriors, a man whose blade had been tempered in battles against Saxons and Franks. His mother, Yrsa, was the daughter of a skald, a storyteller whose knowledge of runes and ancient Viking lore spread throughout Scandinavia. From his father, Gunnar inherited an unyielding fury for war. From his mother, he inherited something even rarer, a mind as sharp as a blade, able to read the winds of fate. Gunnar's clan was known as the Wolves of the North, and their Jarl, Harald Ironhorn, was a man with cold eyes and a voice like thunder, who led with the steady hand of one who had survived more battles than he could count. The Wolves of the North were a warlike people, surviving by raiding, hunting, and the bounty of the sea. They did not believe in luck. They believed only in strength. Gunnar was tested from an early age. At 5, he was wielding a small training axe, hacking at tree trunks until his arms ached. At 7, he was taken on winter hunts, where he learned that hesitation meant death. The first life he took was not that of a man, but that of a wolf. It was a night of heavy snow, and Gunnar, along with other boys of the clan, was sent to guard the outskirts of the settlement. They heard the howls first, a guttural, ancient sound that made the younger ones shiver. Then the yellow eyes appeared in the darkness. A hungry pack had attacked, and while the others fled or cried for help, Gunnar raised his makeshift blade and advanced. The wolf sprang for the kill, but Gunnar rolled aside at the last moment. With a single, well-aimed blow, he drove the blade into the beast's throat. Warm blood sprayed the snow, and the pack retreated. When the clan's warriors arrived, they found Gunnar standing, holding the wolf's head like a trophy. That night, Harald Ironhorn looked at him differently. At 12, Gunnar was already training with the clan's veterans. His talent for war was undeniable. He was not only strong, he was precise, meticulous, tireless. His strikes were swift as the wind and true as an arrow. At 15, he fought in his first real battle, when the Saxons attempted to seize one of the clan's trade routes. He entered the battlefield with an axe larger than himself, and emerged covered in blood, but not his own. He defeated 3 men that night, and the skalds began to whisper his name in their songs. But it was at 18 that Gunnar truly became a legend. The clan was attacked by an alliance of rival jarls, who sought to overthrow Harald Ironhorn and seize his lands. In the chaos, the jarl's stronghold was besieged, and Harald was left stranded with only a few of his men. Most of the clan's warriors were away raiding the sea, and defeat seemed certain. Then Gunnar did the unthinkable. He gathered his few remaining warriors and attacked the enemy army in the night, like a ghost emerging from the darkness. He led a charge so fierce that the enemy men believed they were being slaughtered by an entire army. In the center of the battlefield, he fought with an almost divine fervor. His blades danced as if they were alive, and each blow felled a new enemy. The next morning, the enemies fled. The jarl was safe. It was in this battle that Harald gave him the name Cold Flame. For never before had he seen a warrior who fought with such fiery fury yet so controlled. After this victory, Harald Ironhorn adopted Gunnar as his own son. He trained him personally, teaching him not only the art of war, but also strategy, politics, and leadership. Gunnar learned that strength alone did not rule. You needed intelligence, loyalty, and above all, the ability to inspire others to follow you to hell itself. Harald named him the clan's champion, his blade, and his shield. When the other jarls challenged him, it was Gunnar who answered, and he never lost. Now, years later, Gunnar Cold Flame was Scandinavia's greatest warrior. He had vanquished every enemy, overcome every challenge. His name was sacred among warriors. Harald himself said that Gunnar was his greatest achievement, his greatest weapon. And that was why, that year, Gunnar entered the Jarl's tournament with no doubt that he would emerge victorious. He was the greatest warrior alive. He had never lost a battle. He had never backed down from a challenge. But then, he saw the stranger, a man no one knew, tall as a giant, eyes as black as night. He fought fearlessly, without hesitation, as if he knew he had already won. For the first time, Gunnar felt a chill that did not come from the north wind. Was this the opponent the gods had sent to test his true worth? High above Asgard, where the winds howled between the golden columns of Velasjof's great hall, the gods gathered. Odin's hall was vast and imposing, supported by pillars carved with battle scenes that told of the deeds of Midgard's greatest warriors. The ceiling reflected the brightness of the stars, and beneath it, on a throne as black as night, the Allfather rested, his single eye surveying the world of men with the calm of one who had watched the ages pass like leaves in the wind. Around a table forged from the fragments of spears broken in battle, the gods murmured, their voices like subdued thunder. Thor, son of thunder, leaned back in his seat, his thick fingers drumming impatiently on the hilt of Mjolnir, which rested in his lap. His eyes sparkled as Odin's magical vision projected images of the Jarl's tournament onto the table's gleaming surface. They watched the fighting, the warriors falling, the crowds roaring. To the gods, it had always been a trivial spectacle, a pastime to entertain their immortal eyes. But then a name appeared that echoed like thunder across the plains of glory, Gunnar Cold Flame, the warrior who awoke Thor's wrath. Gunnar's first fight was like any other. The crowd screamed, blood stained the ground, and a warrior fell. But when the gods saw his fight, a strange tension settled between them. The way he moved, the coldness in his gaze, the weight of his blows, it was all too perfect. No man should fight like that. He did not hesitate. He did not tire. He did not fail. He fights as if he were one of us, murmured Tyr, the god of war, crossing his arms. Or rather, as if he knew he had already won before the fight even began, added Freyr, with a curious smile on his lips. Thor did not smile. His blue eyes were storms ready to rage. This man should not exist. His words made the gods turn their gazes to the son of Odin. Thor was the greatest warrior in Asgard, and never in countless ages had he seen a mortal who stirred his uneasiness. But Gunnar was different. In the years that followed, Thor watched, and the more he watched, the more something grew inside him. A fire, a need, a challenge. He watched Gunnar defeat champions without blinking. He watched him fight in storms, against spears and swords, as if destiny itself were on his side. And then came the tournament that would change everything. That year, Gunnar Coldflame would return to the arena, and Thor could no longer stand still. Odin's order and the descent of the god. That night, Thor rose from his stone chair and turned to Odin. "I must descend." The whole fell silent. The gods looked at each other. Odin, however, showed no surprise. And for what? His voice sounded like distant thunder. To fight. To prove that no man can be greater than a god. Odin rubbed his chin covered by his silver beard. He knew. He knew that the son of thunder would not rest until he had wielded his hammer against this mortal. "Then go," he said after a long moment. "But go as a man, not as a god. Do not carry Mjolnir. Do not use your divine fury. If you wish to challenge Gunnar, do so by mortal rules." Thor narrowed his eyes. It would be a humiliation to fight without his hammer, without his celestial strength. But he would not back down. So be it. And the following night, Thor set off for Midgard, the arrival of an unknown warrior. The next morning, amid the biting Scandinavian winds, an unknown warrior appeared in the Jarl's camp. He was as tall as a giant. His shoulders were broad, his muscles sculpted like those of a god carved from stone. He wore a black wolfskin over his shoulders, and his eyes were as dark as the starless night. His gaze pierced the men, as if probing their souls. He did not smile, did not speak, just watched. "Who is this man?" one of the soldiers murmured. "He looks like a demon." The Jarls noticed his presence. The warriors whispered. But he did not introduce himself. He simply walked to the arena, picked up a spear that had been thrown on the ground, and stabbed it into the ground, as if in silent challenge. In the center of the arena, Gunnar Coldflame looked up. For the first time in years, he felt something he had not felt since his youth. "Is this excitement?" The crowd began to murmur. Who was this stranger? Where had he come from? The Jarl's tournament was about to change forever. The cloudy sky of Midgard seemed to reflect the intensity of the event, as if the gods themselves were looking down from above upon the mortal combats. It was the place where heroes were born and where they also met their end. The battles were not just a test of strength. They were a dance of life and death, where every movement was a promise of glory or the sentence of a dark oblivion. The Jarls, princes from distant lands, had gathered with their best warriors, and among them, two stood out in an unusual way. Gunnar Coldflame and the unknown Black Wolf warrior who had arrived the day before, with the eyes of a relentless hunter and a presence so strong that it seemed to threaten the wind itself. Gunnar, the man who had already defeated countless adversaries with his coldness, was now more focused than ever. His gaze, which had previously been impassive, now carried something new, the feeling of a great challenge ahead. something he had never imagined feeling against a mortal man. The presence of the Black Wolf warrior was a direct invitation to fight, a promise that nothing would be easy. Thor, for his part, had decided that the tournament would be his battlefield, but instead of his golden armor and his Mjolnir, he would use only a forged steel sword and a simple shield, like an ordinary man. The thunder inside him roared, but he stood his ground, his fury contained by the discipline of a warrior. Gunnar did not hesitate as he entered the arena. His posture was impeccable, as if the ground beneath his feet was a battlefield already conquered. He looked at his opponent, a young warrior from a small clan, whose face was pale with fear. The opponent's sword trembled in his hand, and Gunnar felt the man's weakness before he even moved a muscle. The battle was quick. The young warrior tried to attack with a high blow, seeking to deliver a fatal blow, but Gunnar moved with the precision of a serpent. He crouched down and, in one fluid motion, extended his sword, striking his opponent in the ribs with frightening ease. The sound of the impact was drowned out by the roar of the crowd, but the man fell, and the arena fell silent for a moment. Gunnar did not smile. He never smiled. He simply watched, impassive, as the defeated warrior was led from the arena. The voices of the crowd fell silent in respect for his power, but there was something in Gunnar's eyes that seemed to defy everything around him. He was a monster of war, not of blood, but of pure strategy. Thor, the god of thunder, stepped into the next arena. He looked simpler than the other warriors, without divine armor, without his magic hammer. Only his enormous stature and the strength exuding from his body revealed his true nature. The sword he held was worn, and the shield he carried was simple, but it was shaped like a roaring lion, representing Thor's indomitable spirit. His opponent was a giant warrior from the Vard clan. The fight between them seemed inevitable, as if destiny itself were forging this encounter. The Vard warrior growled, and with a roar, he advanced with brutal force, his gleaming sword cutting through the air like a storm about to break. Thor, with his sword raised, prepared himself. He knew that the fight would be intense, but he also knew that the strength of a god was incomparable. The giant attacked with a vertical blow, seeking to deliver a fatal cut, but Thor, with the skill of a veteran, dodged to the left and struck his enemy with a diagonal cut, hitting the arm that held the sword. The sound of metal cutting through flesh and bone echoed through the arena, and the giant screamed in pain. But he did not fall. Instead, he retreated and attacked again, more furious than ever. The battle continued with the fury of a gale. Thor and the Vard warrior struck each other with force, but the giant could not keep up with Thor's agility. Each blow the god struck seemed heavier than the last, more accurate. Finally, in one swift movement, Thor disarmed the giant, throwing his sword away, and with a final movement, he felled his opponent with a precise blow to the back. The giant fell to the ground with a thud that made the arena shake, and the crowd burst into applause. But Thor did not smile. He stared at the ground, his mind focused on another objective. Gunnar was closer. The tournament progressed, and the battles became more and more intense. But everyone knew that the true fight was yet to come. The god of thunder and the man who defied the order of the gods were destined to face each other. Both were taken to the center of the arena, a sacred space where warriors faced each other for the title of greatest Jarl. The voices of the crowd fell silent, as if the world itself were watching the final confrontation. The biting wind of Midgard seemed to stop, and the air became dense, as if awaiting the impact of the clash between two titans. Gunnar, sword in hand, stared at Thor with cold eyes, calculating the god's every move. Thor, on the other hand, was calm, but his spirit was on fire. He knew this would be the most difficult fight of his life. It was not just a question of strength, but of honor. The two stared at each other for a long moment, until, with a primal scream, Gunnar advanced. He did not use uncontrolled fury, but immense focus, like a hunter closing in on his prey. Thor braced himself, his muscles tense and ready to react. The first clash between their swords made the sound of iron vibrate like distant thunder. The impact was so strong that the vibrations echoed throughout the arena. Each of Gunnar's blows was precise, each movement calculated. He fought with deadly calm, trying to wear Thor down, waiting for him to fail. Thor, with his immense strength, responded with violent blows, each one charged with the power of a god. The clash between them was like a war of opposing elements, fire and ice, storm and stone. The fights ensued, each move more epic than the last. The battlefield was covered in blood, but neither seemed willing to give in. It was a fight for supremacy between a man and a god. And, like every great clash, this confrontation would seal the fate of both. Hours had passed, and the fight between Thor and Gunnar Coldflame dragged on like a furious storm that showed no signs of stopping. The battlefield was marked by the violence of their blows. The swords and spears were already worn. The blood of both combatants stained the ground, and the crowd watched in total silence, absorbed in the titanic spectacle of power and resistance. Gunnar, with his unperturbed gaze, seemed tireless. He had pushed Thor to the limits of his strength. His every move was calculated, cold, and with each new attack, it seemed that the god of thunder would finally be defeated. But Thor was different. The god was being challenged like never before, and his rage was a storm about to erupt. The two warriors, exhausted, were only a few steps away from each other, with their bodies mutilated and breathing heavily. Gunnar, with a last effort, threw himself forward, sliding to cut off Thor's arm. The blow, delivered with the precision of a predator, struck the god in the shoulder, making him stagger. Thor screamed in pain, something rare for such an imposing being, but it was enough to leave the crowd stunned. The impact of the blow was like a thunderclap shattering the earth. The pain in his shoulder reverberated throughout his body, but something inside Thor began to change. His gaze, previously filled with fury, now transformed into something deeper, more primordial. It was the awakening of his true divine essence. The power of a god was about to be unleashed. With a roar of rage, Thor rose with unbearable strength, feeling his divine energy pulsate within him. His hands trembled, but not from pain. It was the storm within him manifesting itself, the power of Asgard breaking the mortal's limits. The clouds above the arena roiled, and lightning began to tear through the sky. It was as if Odin himself, with his watchful gaze, was watching his son's transformation. Thor raised his steel sword, and with a primal scream, he struck a blow that split the air like a red thunder. He attacked Gunnar with a fury that made the battlefield tremble. The shock of the impact was so great that the ground opened up beneath the feet of both warriors, and the arena was illuminated by a flash as bright as the sun itself. With the force of 1,000 thunders, Thor threw Gunnar away, as if he were a leaf in the wind. The Black Wolf warrior flew through the air, his body cutting through space like a meteor, until finally he fell heavily to the ground, farther away than anyone could have imagined. The impact made the sound of bones breaking echo, and the crowd trembled. The god of thunder laughed, not a laugh of mockery, but a laugh that reflected the joy of seeing his power finally unleashed, of realizing that he had surpassed the limits imposed by his own pride. Thor had awakened. When the god looked at Gunnar, still lying on the ground, his countenance was now imposing and filled with indescribable strength. Thor approached his opponent with heavy steps, the weight of his divine aura becoming more palpable with each movement. He bowed, extending his hand to the wounded warrior, and, with a gesture of unthinkable generosity for someone who had just defeated him, lifted Gunnar from the ground. Gunnar, panting and in intense pain, looked at Thor with teary eyes, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. He knew he was facing something much greater than he himself had ever imagined. Your place in Asgard is already assured, Gunnar Cold Flame. You will not be just a warrior in Valhalla. You are worthy of more. Your destiny is not to be a specter in the shadows. You will be a Jarl of Asgard. Your strength and honor have transcended even mine. Those words reverberated throughout the arena. Gunnar, now understanding the magnitude of the victory and honor offered to him, bowed respectfully. He said nothing. The gesture was more than enough. With Gunnar's fate sealed, Thor looked up at the sky. The air around him electrified, and the light of the Bifrost, the magical rainbow that connected Midgard to Asgard, appeared on the horizon. The earth shook again, but this time it was the sound of the great Bifrost, a cosmic portal that would take Thor back to his homeland. With a gesture, Thor raised his arms to the heavens, and the Bifrost shone even brighter. Like a wave of expanding light, the god of thunder was enveloped by a celestial energy, his body merging with the golden light. The sky lit up as if it were a second sun. The air around Thor changed, and before the Jarls and warriors could fully comprehend what was happening, he disappeared in the beam of light that took them back to Asgard. The arena was silent for a moment, and when the light faded, the Jarls and the crowd were stunned. They knew something extraordinary had just happened, but they could not comprehend the full magnitude of the event. Gunnar Cold Flame, the mortal warrior, was now somehow related to the gods. His name would echo throughout Asgard, but his journey was far from over. When Thor's light finally faded, a roar of celebration rang out. Thor's victory and Gunnar's inclusion in Asgard marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The greatness of the two warriors would now be remembered in stories, told by bards across the lands, and the world knew that the future of Midgard and Asgard had been changed forever. The Skald is silent for a moment, the crackling of the fire filling the silence. His eyes rise to the sky, as if searching for the stars, as if searching for the echo of the legends he has just sung. The warriors around him, still absorbed, feel the weight of the words. The legend of Gunnar and Thor will not be forgotten, like all the stories that have been sung by the light of the fires throughout the ages. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.